The Peloponnesian War, a war between Athens and Sparta and their allies for hegemony in Greece, it was preceded by conflicts between the Athenians and the Spartan allies Corinth and Megara. When the Athenian ruler Pericles declared a trade war on Megara, the Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta, demanded the cancellation of the trade blockade imposed on Megara by the Athenian naval alliance. Athens, being rather stubborn about it, refused, and the war jolly well began. Sparta relied on its superiority on land. Its hoplites were the most numerous and professionally trained chaps. Athens, on the other hand, had unchallenged dominance at sea, with a fleet of 300 triremes, a fair few boats, that Pericles hoped to force the Peloponnesian League to capitulate through a blockade, you see. The Athenians believed that the powerful fortifications of the city would allow them to repel the attack of the Spartan army invading Attica. The hostilities began with the bands attacking the city of Plataea, allied with Athens. The attack, well, it failed rather spectacularly. Many of the bands were killed, and those captured were, rather grimly, executed. Then, the Spartan troops, led by King Archidamus, invaded the land of Attica. Pericles ordered the rural population to take refuge behind the long walls which covered the territory between Athens and the Piraeus harbour. The Spartans devastated the outskirts of the city but didn't quite have the gumption to besiege it. Meanwhile, the Athenian fleet made a sortie to the western coast of the Peloponnese but didn't dare to land troops, not a sausage. Soon, Archidamus cleared Attica. The Athenian army took advantage of this and captured Megara and Aegina, good on 'em. In 430 BC, Archidamus repeated the invasion of Attica. This time, he besieged Athens for several months, the blighter. In the city, overcrowded with refugees, famine and a plague epidemic began, nasty business. According to some reports, a quarter of the population of Attica perished, a terrible loss, what? But the active actions of the Athenian fleet forced the Spartans to retreat, tail between their legs, one might say. The Athenians destroyed several cities on the coast of the Peloponnese and took prisoners. At the beginning of 429 BC, they managed to capture Potidaea on Chalcidice after a long siege. Took their sweet time, didn't they? Athenian ships blockaded the Peloponnese, but the Athenians lacked infantry for a full-scale invasion, a bit short on boots on the ground. The war took on the character of a war of attrition, a long slog. Epidemics spread in the besieged Athens, rotten luck. The death of Pericles, who became a victim of the plague in 429 BC, led to an exacerbation of the struggle between the democratic and aristocratic parties in Athens, a right old kerfuffle. In 428 BC, the Spartans again invaded Attica, persistent, weren't they? The Athenians, however, managed to capture the city of Mytilene on the island of Lesbos, which had revolted from Athens, served them right. In 427 BC, the Peloponnesians, after a 2-year siege, captured Plataea, destroying the Athenian garrison, dashed their hopes, they did. The growing hardships of the war and the struggle of the parties prompted the Athenians to try to strengthen the army and defeat the Spartans on land. In 425 BC, the Athenian strategist Demosthenes captured the harbour of Pylos on the Peloponnese and built a fortress there, rather clever, that. In response, the Spartans landed 420 hoplites on the island of Sphacteria opposite Pylos. But the Athenian fleet defeated the fleet of Sparta and its allies, gave them a good thrashing. As a result, the Sphacteria garrison was cut off, marooned, they were. A detachment of 800 Athenian hoplites and 800 peltastes landed on the island under the command of the head of the Athenian Democratic Party and the first strategist Cleon. Peltastes were lightly armed warriors. Their main weapons were throwing spears, javelins or slings for throwing stones, as well as short swords. The armor of the peltastes consisted of a light round shield, a pelta, as well as a helmet and a leather or canvas cuirass. The peltastes exhausted the Spartan phalanx, bombarding it with javelins and stones and quickly retreating as the enemy hoplites approached, nippy little devils. Eventually, the Spartans were blocked in a small fortification and forced to surrender, had no choice, poor sods. 292 people were taken prisoner. But the victory at Pylos was nullified by the raid of the Spartan commander Brasidas into northern Greece, a bit of a setback, that. He set out with a 2,000-strong elite detachment and invaded Chalcidice. At Delium in 424 BC, the Athenians suffered a defeat, losing at least 1,000 hoplites, a proper drubbing. With the help of the Macedonian king Pericles, Brasidas managed to capture Amphipolis, the most important Athenian colony on the peninsula, a real blow. The Athenians were forced to concentrate their main forces under Cleon near Amphipolis. In 422 BC, a decisive battle took place here. Both commanders, Brasidas and Cleon, popped their clogs and the Athenian army was defeated, a right mess. The forces of both sides were exhausted, knackered, they were, and in 421 BC, the Peace of Nicias was concluded on the basis of the pre-war status quo. However, contrary to the agreement, the Spartan garrison remained in Amphipolis and the Athenian garrison in Pylos, a bit of a fudge, wasn't it? In fact, the Peace of Nicias turned out to be only a truce, a temporary lull. In 420 BC, the leader of the military aristocratic party Alcibiades was elected strategist in Athens, a clever sort. He organized an expedition to Sicily. The capture of this rich island was supposed to undermine the supply of the Peloponnese with grain and force Sparta to capitulate, a bold plan. In 415 BC, a fleet of more than 100 Athenian triremes set sail for Sicily, quite a flotilla. The fleet of allies joined it. The Athenians managed to capture the city of Catana and begin the blockade of Syracuse, the largest city in Sicily. However, at the height of the siege, Alcibiades was recalled to Athens, where he was to stand trial. The Democrats accused him of religious sacrilege, a bit of a scandal. The commander, having transferred command to Nicias, preferred to flee to Sparta, sharpish. Meanwhile, a Spartan army led by the commander Gylippus landed in Sicily. It managed to deblockade Syracuse, turned the tables, they did. The Spartans, together with the Syracusans, attacked the besiegers. The Athenian squadron of 75 triremes with 5,000 warriors led by Demosthenes, which came to the rescue from Athens, was defeated by the Peloponnesian fleet, a proper pasting. The land forces of the Athenians and the remnants of the fleet were forced to capitulate, no way out. The captured Nicias and Demosthenes were executed, a grim end, and more than 7,000 Athenian sailors and soldiers were enslaved, a shocking business. In total, the Athenians lost more than 10,000 people and 200 triremes, a catastrophic loss. Athens still held on, but after the Sicilian catastrophe, many allies deserted it. The islands of Chios, Lesbos, the Asian minor Miletus, and others, a right old exodus. On the advice of Alcibiades, the Spartans in 413 BC built a fortified camp in Decelia, 20 kilometers from Athens, and began the blockade of the city, tightening the noose. As a result of constant enemy raids, the agriculture of Attica was undermined, a proper blight. The main forces of the Athenian fleet were sent to Samos to prevent the polis of this island from defecting to the enemy. The Peloponnesian fleet, meanwhile, strengthened itself in Miletus. The Spartans concluded an agreement with the Persian satrap Tissaphernes, recognizing the sovereignty of the Persians over the Asian Greeks, rather a deal with the devil. The Persians, in turn, provided the Spartans with subsidies for the maintenance of the fleet, kept them afloat, they did. The Peloponnesian fleet was also reinforced by squadrons of Ionian Greeks. The confrontation at Samos was interrupted in 411 BC by an oligarchic coup in Athens, a bit of a shake-up. Power passed to the Council of 400, elected only by the 5,000 richest citizens, a select bunch. The oligarchs tried to reach an agreement with Sparta on the basis of the Peace of Nicias. However, the Spartans insisted on Athens completely abandoning hegemony at sea, no compromise there. At this time, the Athenians suffered a defeat at Erythraia, another setback. The Spartans occupied Euboea, which was richer than Attica, a valuable prize. The government of the 400 fell, and power passed to Theramenes, who expressed the interests of the 5,000 wealthiest citizens, another change of guard. Simultaneously, Alcibiades switched to the side of Athens and took command of the fleet at Samos, back in the fold. He managed to secure the support of the Persians and win several victories over the Peloponnesian fleet, turned the tide a bit. Thanks to this, it was possible to resume the supply of grain to Athens from the Greek colonies on the shores of the Black Sea, kept them fed, that did. In 407 BC, Alcibiades returned to Athens at the head of a fleet of 200 triremes with rich booty and prisoners, a triumphant return. He was made Strategos autocrator with unlimited power, top dog. But Alcibiades did not rule for long, his time was short. The Persians, concerned about the successes of the Athenians, provided new subsidies to the Spartans, bolstering their efforts. The Spartan navic Lysander managed to defeat the Athenian fleet at the Cape of Notion, a blow to Athenian pride. After this, Alcibiades was exiled from Athens, out on his ear. In the following year, 406 BC, the Athenians won their last major victory. The Peloponnesian fleet was defeated at the Arginusi Islands, and its commander Callicratidas, who had replaced Lysander, was killed, a significant loss for the Spartans. At the beginning of the battle, the Athenian strategist Cunning encountered the main forces of the Spartan fleet near Lesbos and, losing 30 triremes, took refuge in the harbour of Mytilene, a bit of a sticky wicket. To his rescue came 110 Athenian triremes, reinforced by 40 triremes of the allies, a formidable force. Callicratidas had 170 triremes, of which 50 he left to blockade Mytilene, and the rest he moved to meet the Athenian fleet at the Arginusi Islands. The Athenians' advantage of 30 triremes proved decisive, numbers told. Moreover, Callicratidas' flagship was captured by the enemy at the very beginning of the battle, which disrupted the command of the Peloponnesian fleet, a right shambles. The Spartans lost 77 ships and the Athenians only 25, a clear victory. However, a storm that arose prevented the burial of the dead according to the established custom, a terrible oversight. For this, 6 Athenian commanders, led by the fleet commander Thrasyllus, were executed, a harsh punishment. With Persian help, the Spartans restored the fleet and in 405 BC defeated the Athenians in the naval battle of Aegispotami in the Hellespont, the final nail in the coffin. Before this, Lysander, thanks to Persian money, doubled the pay of his sailors and announced that Athenian rowers would receive the same pay if they switched to his service, a tempting offer. This caused mass desertion from the Athenian ranks, a proper drain on their manpower. In the battle at the mouth of the Aegispotami River, the Athenian fleet of 180 triremes was commanded by Cunning, and the Spartan fleet of 170 triremes by Lysander. For 5 days, both fleets, lined up in a line, stood opposite each other without engaging in battle, a tense standoff. On the 6th day, Lysander, waiting for the moment when the enemy crews went ashore to replenish their water and food supplies, attacked, a cunning move. Simultaneously, on land, the Spartan infantry suddenly went on the offensive from behind Aegispotami. Only 9 triremes under the command of Cunning, on which all the rowers had managed to board, were able to escape, a lucky few. Ships with incomplete crews of rowers could not maneuver and became easy prey for the Spartans, sitting ducks. They captured 171 triremes and 3,000 prisoners, who were immediately executed, a brutal end to the war. Athens was besieged, this time not only from land but also from the sea, no escape. In April 404 BC, hunger forced the Athenians to capitulate, they had no choice. The long walls were demolished and the remnants of the Athenian fleet were destroyed, their defences gone. Athens was allowed to have only 12 small ships to guard the Piraeus harbour, a mere shadow of its former glory. Hegemony in Greece passed to Sparta, they were top dog now. Under its pressure, an oligarchic government of the Commission of 30, popularly known as the 30 Tyrants, was established in Athens, a harsh regime. It was headed by the philosopher Critias, a student of the great Socrates. But already in 403 BC, a bloc of democrats and moderate oligarchs, supported by Sparta, overthrew the tyranny of the 30, gave end their marching orders. Critias was killed, and Athens never managed to revive its former significance, a sad decline. The Spartans, meanwhile, continued military operations in Asia Minor, seeking to bring the local Greeks under their control, extending their reach. However, Spartan hegemony lasted only 3 decades, a brief reign. In 371 BC, in the Battle of Leuctra, the Spartans and their Peloponnesian allies were defeated by the bands led by the commander Epaminondas, who for the first time used a new phalanx formation, the oblique wedge, a clever tactic. Within this formation, the left wing of the phalanx became the most powerful, up to 50 rows deep, at the expense of weakening the center and right wing, a bit of a gamble. Thanks to this, it was possible to easily break through the front of the enemy phalanx, a decisive move. Later, the Macedonians adopted the phalanx with the oblique wedge, a successful strategy. The defeat of Athens in the Peloponnesian War was largely predetermined by Pericles and most of his successors' reliance on a strategy of attrition, a long game. Since Sparta was weaker than Athens in trade and finance and had a less numerous fleet, the Athenians believed that the Lacedaemonians would not withstand a protracted struggle and, if they did not capitulate, would at least abandon their claims to primacy among the Greek polis, a bit of wishful thinking. However, the miscalculation was that Persia, seeing the Athenians as the most dangerous rival, did not want their rise, even though they were objectively stronger than Sparta, playing a canny game. Therefore, when success seemed to be leaning towards the Athenians, the Persians helped the Spartans, tipping the scales. This allowed the Peloponnesian League to create a powerful fleet, not inferior to the Athenian one, evening the odds. The fate of the Peloponnesian War, like the Greco-Persian Wars, was decided at sea, where it all came down to it.